Our next speakers are Mike Davis and Emily Smith, and they talk to us about virtual reality. Is that right?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. And thank you all for welcoming us here to your seminar. And thanks so much to Mike for such a wonderful presentation on the Star Wars special effects. We're going to raise you the Millennium Falcon and Maz's Castle with our Cambrian ocean stars, Opibimia and Anomera Localis. I'm from the Natural History Museum next door. I expect that everybody in this room has spent a lot of time exploring our wonderful galleries that explore the wonders of the natural world and explain natural systems to visitors and engage visitors with natural world science. Behind the scenes next door, as I'm sure you all know, we have 350 research scientists working across a breadth of collections that span the whole of the natural world, 80 million specimens, and researchers who are researching into ecosystems, specific species, natural resources, disease control, really important scientific problems of the natural world that are facing us today. And Mike is from Atlantic Productions, a partner of ours. I'll just hand over to him to introduce Atlantic.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today. After seeing that last reel, I can now reveal that Sir David Attenborough has been computer generated for the last 10 years. Please don't tell anyone. No, I've been lucky enough to work with David over the last 5 years or so. In fact, we've done 10 projects with him. Though not exclusively, we do. Atlantic Productions is a kind of leading independent television production company. We not only work on series and specials, including natural history and science and even drama, but we also do giant screen films for IMAX and now entering into VR, which is an exciting new medium of visual storytelling, which is what we're going to talk about today.
Great, thanks. And today's presentation is about a pilot project exploring virtual reality as a technology for use in museums as an interpretive tool. The project that we'll share with you was built from a long-standing relationship between the Natural History Museum and Atlantic Productions. We'd worked together on a number of films that explored the natural world in 2D and in 3D. And the VR project was an opportunity for us to look together at what that technology can do for museum visitors in their understanding, appreciation and enjoyment of the natural world. Before we go into detail on the project, we'll just play you a little clip that it explains the kind of final outcome of the project, then we'll go into detail about how we developed it.
So Atlantic Productions pride themselves on their storytelling, I guess. We're always pushing the boundaries of technology. In terms of TV, we certainly pushed the envelope in terms of 3D with our relationship with Sky and our David Attenborough 3D projects for TV and for IMAX. But VR represents a whole new sandpit to play in, I suppose, in terms of storytelling. And it's challenging, but hugely exciting for us as well. As you can see, First Life is a kind of digital experience, much more akin to a kind of game engine type experience or computer game. But obviously, photorealism was hugely important to us and the museum because what we're trying to do, I guess even though this slightly blurs the boundaries between fact and fiction, drama and documentary, this is all about accuracy. And one of the great things was working very closely with the scientists at the museum to ensure that the environment that you travel through in these Cambrian seas 500 million years ago are entirely accurate, or as close as we can, and that based on all the fossil records that we have and any other information we have in terms of referencing animals that are alive today, can we make these animals look as believable as possible? That was absolutely key in terms of this VR experience being the perfect collaboration with the Natural History Museum for us. I guess with VR, and I'm sure you've all tried VR and you all can see the potential for it, it's a kind of an exploding medium and everyone's trying to get a handle on it and work out how it works. Is it games? Is it feature length? Is it interactive? How will people of all ages engage with it? But principally for us, it's about story, really, and it's kind of forcing us to rethink the grammar of visual storytelling. We've gotten used to, over the last 100 years or so, of a particular way of telling a story through this visual medium of film or TV. We've gotten used to the way we can cut between close-ups and start to create stories by using this series of 2D images, in effect. And we've gotten so used to it that it's just kind of built into our very kind of way we interpret everything around us. So VR is challenging that and slightly opening up different ways of telling these kind of stories. I always slightly pretentiously use the Buster Keaton analogy, which is, a very early film, early 20th century. But there's a wonderful cut in it where Buster's on the train and he's racing along the track, and then there's an explosion ahead, and you cut forward, it's on a telephoto lens, and you cut forward to see that piece of track that falls down ahead. Then you cut back to Buster and he's completely oblivious to what's going to happen. And that creates a tension, that cut creates a tension and begins to entertain and inform the story. You don't really get to cut in the same way in VR. So for this journey, which is a sort of 10-minute ride, as it were, through the Cambrian seas, experiencing all the creatures along the way, there are no cut points, so to speak. Or if they are, they're kind of hidden. You go through a cave and then suddenly you're ahead another 100 million years or so to experience different creatures. But it's highly immersive, as I'm sure you're aware, and therefore you can't cut to close-ups and use that same grammar that we've just had ingrained into us over the last 100 years or so. So it's forcing us to start to rethink how we tell stories in a really exciting way. Just in terms of the kind of realism and our relationship with the museum, I mean, I've always found it's fascinating, I'm sure Emily will agree, that museums don't have the budget, the sort of movie budgets to create very photorealistic looking creatures. It just doesn't exist. So often when they collaborate with people like us, and we work with the museum on Natural History Museum Alive, where David went into the museum and creatures came to life, we had a great budget there to create movie-style creatures. It's the kind of documentary equivalent to the Star Wars creatures that we've just seen. We pride ourselves on them looking completely real with the real physics and so on. And I always find it fascinating, and I come from a visual effects background myself, I'm a director now, but that scientists are still really excited when they see these creatures come to life. You're taking all the information they've got, and then you're applying the kind of physics of the real world, and you're adding textures and detail and animation techniques that always kind of completely blows their minds, And that was certainly the case with this, I believe. The scientists that have studied these marine animals from the Cambrian seas their whole lives, suddenly seeing them brought to life in a way that they hadn't experienced is pretty mind-blowing, even more so in VR, where suddenly you're coming face-to-face with them. I think it's a real thrill for scientists to have this realized in a way. I remember we did something for Walking with Beasts a while back now, a BBC show, where we had an Australopithecus, and the way it walked, its kind of hips and so on, the paleontologist had never kind of seen it realized like that, and suddenly it presented a whole bunch of problems about how it would walk and so on, and he'd never really considered the posture and so on. And all of those things come to life when you start to visualize these creatures, which is really thrilling, And as I say, VR makes that presence of that creature all the more lifelike. It's right there, you can follow it around, and you can see it and explore and examine it in a way that you never could on a flat screen. So, for us, VR is really exciting, but it's not just experiential. For us, it's about telling stories, and so it shouldn't just be a thrill ride through the Cambrian Ocean. We wanted to make sure that using David's VO, his narration, and his kind of knowledge, we wanted to make sure it was a proper story, and that it was kind of educational, entertaining, and there was a story arc. And I would probably controversially say that many VR experiences are just a kind of thrill ride, and you take it off and you go, wow, it was great to be on the top of Everest, or on a roller coaster. But we really want to transform, with the Natural History Museum, the way people come in and experience stories that are based on real science. Obviously, partnering with David Attenborough was really helpful. He prides himself on storytelling. He's one of the great storytellers of our age. He's been in the corner of our living room for 60 years, and it's an immense privilege to work with him on projects like this. He has an amazing, long-standing relationship with the Natural History Museum. In fact, One of his earliest memories is walking into the Natural History Museum and seeing the blue butterflies laid out there, and that inspiring and informing that passion that he has for the natural world. So it's wonderful to continue the relationship he has with the Natural History Museum, having it started 90 years ago. It's pretty extraordinary, really. We've had a relationship with him for the last 6 or so years. We've done 10 projects with him. One of them, Natural History Museum Alive, was actually set in the Natural History Museum at night, where all the creatures come to life around him, which was very magical. But he's also always keen to push the envelope of technology. And, I'd love to be saying that and kind of, slightly blowing smoke, as it were. But, he genuinely loves new technology. And so, as I'm sure you're aware, over his 60-year career, he's won BAFTAs, but pushed the medium in black and white, color, Ultra HD, 3D, and now pushing into VR. It's amazing, and he genuinely, his passion for the natural world, and I've directed a few series with him where you see that up close. But he's really passionate about new camera technology and new ways of telling stories, and he's really embraced VR and is hugely excited about it, which is great fun for us. So he's a brilliant partner in that respect. And I think for him, he thinks that VR opens up all sorts of new possibilities in terms of immersion and contact and understanding of the natural world. And I guess it also allows him to reach a whole new audience as well, which is exciting too. So it's appropriate that the First Life VR experience should take place in the Natural History Museum's Attenborough studio.
Thank you. So just want to talk a little bit now about why we embarked on this pilot. Obviously, our purpose is to engage visitors with the natural world, to challenge our visitors about the natural world, to help them learn and understand more about the natural world. And we really wanted to test to see if virtual reality was a vehicle through which we could do that. I think it's really important to say we would never do something for its own sake, if that makes sense. Our purpose always is to enlighten, educate people about the natural world and to communicate our knowledge about the natural world, which is based upon the work of our scientists and their cutting-edge research. So it's around sharing that authoritative picture of the natural world and finding different ways to do it. And we have, for a very long time in museum environments, used different technologies to do that, whether it's a piece of MDF with a text panel on it, through to an animatronic roaring T-Rex, which a 3-year-old might think is real. And with virtual reality coming into the environment, that gave us an opportunity to explore whether it is a tool that will engage audiences with the natural world and with scientific concepts in a powerful way. So we set out to pilot a VR experience to see if VR did work in that way for audiences. And we were very lucky because we'd already developed a relationship with Atlantic Productions in the development of the 2D series First Life. So our scientists had already fact-checked and contributed to 2D renders of the Cambrian Ocean with Atlantic. And we got together with Samsung as well to see if, no museum has done this before in such a rich programmatic way. There have been little odd evenings where people might try on a headset, but not to deliver a whole experience and a whole learning experience through virtual reality. So we had to really understand a number, or overcome, I suppose, a number of very, very practical challenges. For us, with our educative purpose, as Mike says, we didn't want it just to be a thrilling Cambrian ride, although that's important. We wanted it to deliver knowledge and understanding and improve people's learning about those first life forms. And we also wanted to communicate to visitors that it was grounded and rooted in museum knowledge and rooted in the very specimens that we hold in the museum, the fossils of these creatures. So we took forward a number of kind of iterative tests over I think, probably 2 months to take us to the perfect application. One of the things, this sounds very kind of prosaic and tactical, but they're important things to realise. We thought, how do we use this technology in the museum? We had lots of discussions. Do we give people headsets and let them wander around the museum? Well, you know, that's chaos because you can't see. You bump into other visitors. Also, if we randomly gave out this technology in galleries, how do we sort out the security of that? You know, it's run by a telephone, which is worth about £700, and the headsets themselves are expensive. So we have to think about health and safety. We have to think about security in how we manage the experience. So through a lot of discussions and a lot of testing, we decided that we wanted to hold it in a closed environment so we could manage people in that space. There was a lot of concern at the start before we'd trialled it around whether visitors would get motion sickness. You know, I remember us sitting in board meetings saying, do we need sick bags? Because we just did not know how it would work out. So we put in place a number of kind of practical solutions to solve those questions. Putting it into this space that you see here, which is the closed space, enabled our visitor services team to both give out and take back the equipment. We also had to work out how to charge the equipment between shows, these kind of practical considerations. And my colleague Helen Green here invented a storage facility which whereby we could lock the phones and the headsets in a cage and charge them at the same time without overheating. So there was a kind of lots of practical solutions to the delivery of the project. When visitors come into the Attenborough studio, the very first thing that they will experience is a kind of like when an air hostess says on an aeroplane, so here's the exit, here's the exit. David Attenborough, wonderful man, very, very kindly agreed to record a kind of explanatory video which helped visitors know what to expect from a very practical point of view. And I think one of the things about that video particularly was the reassurance of David's voice in a new technology. So you cannot help but feel like everything is going to be all right. You know, when David says, and you might feel a little queasy, but it'll be okay, you know, and you really believe that. And I think that has really helped visitors feel comfortable with this new technology, which was one of our real concerns. So we then, in the next thing that is experienced as part of this presentation is a film in which the scientist who works on these fossils, Dr. Greg Edgecombe, talks about the museum collections and how they have been the basis for what visitors are about to experience. So it's very much rooted, again, in the collections and expertise of the museum. And the visitors then, in this first showing, experienced 10 minutes, about 11 minutes of the virtual reality experience, looking around in the Cambrian Ocean and understanding the first life forms. Again, presented, as Mike said, in a really, really dramatic way. So, and then after the experience, as they leave, you'll see on the bottom there, we display the actual fossils from which the data that informs the reconstructions has been built from. So it's a very holistic museum and VR experience. It's not just putting on a headset. It really roots the experience back into the museum. We also had it's interesting, this is our first kind of marketing poster, which we all thought was absolutely wonderful until we realised that actually people don't know yet what virtual reality is really from a public perspective. And we've since got a girl wearing a headset looking up at the creature on our marketing poster. So because it's a pilot, because it's the first time that we've explored this kind of technology in a museum environment, we've had to kind of see how it goes. And here's a picture of the press launch. I just add this in here because sometimes a pilot kind of encourages scrutiny from the great and the good, really. We'd started this as a kind of like, oh, what's this like? But we found that our funders in government were particularly interested as well in the fact that we were exploring at the fringes of technology and creative services. Then just a little piece about the evaluation. So we set out to evaluate whether museum visitors would learn something new, whether they would enjoy this experience, and whether it would encourage a new audience. And we did both qualitative and quantitative evaluation over the first phase of this. So we did. You can read those statistics yourselves. It's clear that it's a very powerful and enjoyable experience. Statistically, visitors were much more likely to be first-time attenders, and statistically, they were much more likely to come from a group called contemporary cultured, so 18 to 35-year-old younger people who came specifically for this experience. And they fed back to us that they were particularly interested in work that was hidden from the human eye. So the Cambrian Ocean was exciting because how else could you ever explain and explore the Cambrian Ocean in a vibrant way? They also were fed back, they were interested in space, in dinosaurs, in other areas that were inaccessible to them. They felt that it was new and an experience that they couldn't see anywhere else, something very different from what they would expect the Natural History Museum to do. And then on the negative side, they wished it was much longer. On the basis of that, we decided to build on another project that Atlantic was developing to look at developing a further experience.
So as Emily says, there wasn't just a desire to do another experience because that previous one had been so successful, and to make it longer and richer for the audience who obviously wanted more of that. But we thought, let's set ourselves another challenge and do it kind of live action. Let's shoot this 360-degree experience. So as you can probably tell, you know, VR very crudely splits into two different kind of disciplines at the moment. The first is kind of building a digital world, which is much more in the kind of gaming conventions, I suppose, at the moment, in terms of bringing VR, using game engines and creating places that you can explore and interact with. Our first life experience, though digital, was very much on rails. So even though it will be fun to be able to swim off over there and go and visit the, the sea scorpion and go through this cave, that's kind of something that maybe we'll take to the next level when people can consume that sort of in their own homes. But in terms of a shared, fun story that they could experience within the museum, it kind of made sense for it to be very much set on rails, as it were, which is a kind of, you're in a digital environment, but we've rendered it so we know exactly where you're going, as it were. That doesn't mean that you can't look around and experience things around you. And I don't know whether to be comforted or slightly concerned by the fact that in that picture that Emily showed, everyone's looking in different directions. We have a kind of an experience that we've mapped out where things are coming and there are audio cues where you look around and you're seeing things at different times. But that doesn't ever stop you from looking up to the surface or looking down to the bottom or looking over your shoulder and seeing other things going on. So really you could go back to the museum and do it a number of times and have a slightly different experience every time or a different focus. But that's a very controllable world because it's a computer scene that you build and you're just rendering it out in 360 like a sphere rather than as a flat 2D experience. Filming it comes with a whole bunch of different challenges, as I'm sure you know. But how often are you on the Great Barrier Reef with Sir David Attenborough in a Triton submersible going down on one of the most beautiful places on Earth? So I was the director of the series, and we decided that as well as shooting the series and a giant screen film, we would also shoot a VR experience so that you could actually be there with David in the sub with this amazing 360-degree view that was a kind of virtue of the Triton submersible anyway, and experience the coral and the wildlife around you at the same time. So, so the challenges were, I suppose, it's not just in the capturing of that footage. We had a jaunt rig inside with David, so capturing him and the scientist he was with and the pilot in this bubble of a submarine, and getting his natural responses to things he's seeing. but we also had a GoPro spherical rig outside with an underwater housing with divers so that you could look back at the submarine and also be right in the middle of a shoal of fish and be there on the reef itself, which was really exciting. But it's not just about the challenges of capturing this and making sure that one of your cameras doesn't go out so you're left with a black space in your 360 sphere of pictures. But when you come back into post-production, it's really challenging as well because you need to stitch all of these elements together. There are lots of issues sometimes with the way those different captured plates sit together. Putting elements in, like compositing elements in and so on, becomes complicated. So, I mean, it was a fantastic opportunity to try out what is a new, exciting, difficult medium of filmmaking, I suppose. It didn't help that I was trying to get a series at the same time, and I do recall being down there trying to get the shots for the series, and then a diver going past with a VR camera rig and saying, "Get out of the bloody way." We had a lot of cameras down there, but I think the foresight was very, very helpful because what it allowed us to do was to get everything while we were there in such a unique place with such a unique man, and I think that the VR experience is all the more exciting for it. What having the different viewpoints allowed you to do? I talked about cutting earlier and that kind of, how does one cut within VR? I mean, you can cut, it just needs to be subtler. But what we learned on this one, rather than it being a continuous journey through the Cambrian seas as it was with First Life, more seamless. With this one, we wanted it to be longer and a bigger experience. It wasn't just going down with David and saying, wow, there's a shoal of fish and there's the coral and being there with him. That was an important part. But it was also about telling the whole story of the reef and making this a 20-minute experience, which is, as I said earlier, entertaining, educational, and has something of an arc. And we thought, well, let's set ourselves a challenge of telling the story of the Great Barrier Reef and what coral is and how it works as an ecosystem. And by using CGI, but also cutting out to be in amongst the water and then cutting back subtly and delicately back into the sub with David, you could start to create a much richer, bigger experience that would sustain your interest over the 20 minutes that you had the headset on. So really, I think there are lots of lessons learned on this, but it's a very different kind of experience. And I think going forward with our relationship with the Natural History Museum, we've now tested those two areas, and there's all sorts of possibilities, I suppose, in terms of creating an experience in a virtual world and going back to a place or a time that one has never been and could never go to, and also going to some of the most extraordinary places on Earth as it stands with one of the most extraordinary people, again, that so many people don't get an opportunity to go to. So they're really exciting, and actually even combining those presents lots of opportunities, which we're talking about now. I think the reef is still on at the museum,
yes,
isn't
the
it?
reef is on at the moment till the end of May, but watch this space for further news. Thanks all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. Very exciting projects for sure, which would inspire our students. You must have some questions for Emily and Mike. Yes?
Given the challenges you faced implementing this in the natural history, with respect to logistics, costs, and generating content, what potential do you see for this propagating into more general educational applications, schools at the end of the day, or things like that?
I think actually Mike can probably talk to this as well, but in the field, we are seeing lots of developments in that area. The American Museum of Natural History has recently partnered with Atlantic and with Google to distribute content through its cardboard headsets. So I think, and I know that there's also some really interesting developmental work being done using virtual reality as a training tool, both in medicine and in terms of R&D and technology. Mike and I were talking at a conference in France recently and saw some really interesting uses. So I think that it's, I think the reason I talked to the challenges is because it was the first time that anyone had done it, and somebody always has to do it first. I think once you understand what those are, then you modify your application the next time. And I think, yes, there are practical hurdles to overcome, but in terms of impact, it was so strong. I mean, for, I think, what is it, 83% of people to learn something new about the natural world, that's astonishingly high. And so I think it will become a much more used technology in both kind of R&D, research and education. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, as a production company, it's incredibly costly, as you can imagine. You know, building virtual environments, photoreal creatures, alone for 2D screens, 69 is expensive, let alone creating a 360 world. And also, you know, the expense of being in a Triton submarine in the middle of the Coral Sea and going down obviously comes at huge cost. I mean, in the instance of these two, they were kind of existing assets that we have that we could kind of adapt without a huge extra kind of cost. So they're brilliant sort of opportunities to explore what's possible. But going forward to create experiences from scratch obviously comes at a cost. And, you know, that requires a certain confidence in terms of funding. You know, those people that are sponsoring and partnering with us on this need to know what kind of an impact it can have. And seeing Google expeditions within schools and seeing how young pupils respond to that kind of interactive experience where it's not just a teacher with a board, but all the kids have Google Cardboard on and the teacher is getting to look around a rainforest, and you know, they come away with a much better sense of presence and guaranteed are learning more as a result of maybe the novelty factor, but certainly the interactive element, you know. And similarly, you know, surgeons being able to look at and explore virtual bodies and the potential there. You know, ordinarily it would be going through manuals for long periods of time, whereas practically getting involved but not physically getting involved, I think is, you know, has huge potential in learning all through the range of, you know, academia. So really exciting, but at the moment it is costly and people do need to be kind of brave and be willing to, you know, to recognize how important a learning tool it is.
Another question?
So I'm curious how you handle the kind of dramaturgic challenge of actually getting people to look at what David is trying to point at. Because from my own experience with virtual reality is that it's very easy to look in all directions, but sometimes you want to have an audience actually looking at a particular thing.
Well, you can direct the gaze, the control. So you do have a particular place you're looking that's your fixed point, and you can direct people to certain areas. So it's not constantly swirling around. You know, you have a fixed point ahead of you, which is where you're kind of orientated to. You just have to be clever about when you introduce other elements. And sound plays such an important part, you know. Sound now is that little cue that something's creeping up behind you, and, you know, other elements like bubbles and so on in First Life can get you to look around and explore. But in our instance, we still want to be in control. You know, I think people still want, you know, people are still watching traditional TVs in the corner of the room because they want to be in the hands of a confident filmmaker who has a story to tell. And I think if everyone's just looking around and, oh, that was great, it may as well just be in a physical space. You know, it's, I think this is still a story and one has to keep people on rails, as it were, and that's just my opinion.
Actually, one day there might be a hologram in the corner of the room. I had a small question, if I'm allowed as a chairman. When you go from the fossil to the virtual reality, you obviously must make assumptions about. So clearly, you could produce 10 or 20 possible virtual realities. Wouldn't it be actually more interesting, or equally interesting, to invite people to see the fossil and then 10 possible interpretations of it?
Yeah, I think that is a very interesting concept. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I don't know, are there 10 possible outcomes? Or it might be with these kind of quite simple life forms, there might be a limited, you know. I mean, this is not related to this particularly, but that Australopithecine example I mentioned earlier, there was another one called a Therosaurus, I think we were doing for Walking with Dinosaurs, which had very long claws. They called it terrible claw. I think you have a claw in your museum.
We do, yeah.
And they thought it was a predator at first, and then they determined that actually it's probably a herbivore and that it used these huge claws to kind of get at foliage and so on. But when we started to animate that, we realized it was really heavy claws and the thing would probably just fall over, you know. So there were various ways you could reposition its hips and figure out how it might balance itself, you know, rather than just walking along the floor, and that's probably why it became extinct. But, you know, there are different ways to think about how you could do this creature. So where there are different interpretations, absolutely.
You're right, there are physical constraints, and obviously they will limit things.
I know at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, they have a infographic that explains 3 different possibilities for the hominid development and the human tree of life, as it were. So that's an example of a museum acknowledging that ambiguity.
But actually, science itself all the time, you know, reinvents itself. I mean,
Yeah.
we never know truth for sure, so
Yeah.
one day perhaps things will change. Well, thank you very much. Very exciting talk, and I have 2 presents to give you. So.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.